Welcome back. In this video, we're going to be going over tuning boost in my Toyota Supra using AEM version 2. It's summer 2021 right now. When I started this series, it was last year, summer 2020. Unfortunately, winter came early. I did not get to finish everything like I thought I would. My Supra is on jack stands for a little while I did a big brake kit upgrade and some new wheels. And I spent a lot of time on my 3000 GT. I had pulled the motor, sent the trans out for a performance rebuild, did some maintenance work on it, a coil on plug upgrade, adjustable cam gears, some BC cams, billet oil pump gear, new clutch, and a bunch of other maintenance stuff that I'd gathered that I'd just been meaning to put in. Unfortunately, the transmission rebuild took longer than we thought. And by the time it got to me, it was late into fall, and I wanted to focus entirely on that with the intention of driving the car some before winter. Unfortunately, that didn't even happen. I ran into an electrical gremlin with my coil on plug setup, and by the time I got that squared away, we had snow on the ground. They'd salted the roads, so I didn't get to drive my 3000 GT, and I didn't get to finish tuning my Supra like I had hoped I would. But it's summer of 2021 right now. Sometimes that's just the way it is. And now I'm excited to be able to turn up the boost. And before I start showing you stuff on the laptop, before I start showing you some cool Microsoft Paint drawings, I want to kind of go over what's going to be happening under the hood, how the boost is controlled, because it's important to understand what's happening here in order to be able to make changes on the laptop to tell the ECU what it needs to do. So let's get started. Here's the motor, and attached to the motor is the exhaust manifold, and the exhaust gas is going to come out of there, and it's going to go up into the exhaust housing on this turbo, which is under this turbo blanket. Inside there is an exhaust wheel that's got a spin. It's connected to a shaft that comes over here. This is the compressor side of the turbo. Inside here is a compressor wheel. The air coming in through this filter is going to get compressed, and it's going to go down into my intercooler piping, go over into the bumper area where I've got my front mount intercooler. That's going to help cool the air, and it's going to come over and go up into my throttle body and enter the motor. And the more compressed air you put into a motor, the more power it's going to be able to make. So let's pretend that you're the inventor of the turbo, you just created it, and you're putting it on the motor for the first time. You're going to run into some issues fairly quick. The first is going to be as you get higher up in the RPMs, 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 RPMs, this turbo's got to run extremely hot. All of that exhaust gas is going to end up going into that turbo. It's probably not going to have a very long shelf life. The second thing is the amount of compressed air that turbo makes is probably going to be too much for the engine. You'll have knocking issues, you'll have maybe a blown head gasket or some other problems. So there needs to be a way to regulate the boost that a turbo can make. And what they did about that was come up with a wastegate. And this car has an external wastegate, and you can't really see it. You can kind of see the V-band for it way down there. But all a wastegate does is it allows exhaust gas to bypass the exhaust housing on the turbo. It's got to not go through the exhaust wheel. It's not got to spin the turbo as fast as it would if you didn't have a wastegate. So on an external wastegate system, it's just attached to the header somewhere before the turbo. And you're probably thinking, if there's an external wastegate, is there an internal wastegate? And yes, there is. So this is my Subaru. This is a stock STI turbo. This is the internal wastegate, and this connects to a rod which goes down beside the exhaust housing, and inside that exhaust housing is a little flap. And when that rod extends out, it'll open that flap, and when it comes back in, it'll close it. So all an internal wastegate means is that the flap, the portion, is inside the exhaust housing of the turbo. It's part of the turbo. Whereas an external wastegate is part of the header, attaches to the header between the motor and the turbo. And on an external setup, there's there's usually two things you can do with that exhaust gas that go through that wastegate that doesn't make its way into the turbo. One is some people will dump it to the ground via a dump tube. Some people will dump it up through the hood. And the other thing you can do is you can take that exhaust gas and you can feed it downstream to the exhaust, and that's called the recirculating setup. So those are the type of wastegates, and I wish I had a spare turbo sitting on the shelf so I could kind of show you what the internal wastegate works like, but I don't. But I do have an extra internal wastegate, and this is off my 3000 GT, and that's what I have right here. And it's got a nipple on it, and there's going to be a vacuum line that runs from here to the motor, and it's going to see boost pressure. So as your motor starts building boost and it starts coming into here, there's a spring in here, and that spring's going to have a rating. I think these are 12-pound springs in here. And once you start building up to that PSI level, so 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, that spring is going to start compressing. And when it does, it's going to move this arm, which would move that wastegate flap. And on an external wastegate, there's not going to be any kind of arm or anything like that. It's just going to be a port that's blocked off with a spring behind it. And as the boost enters behind that spring, it'll start to compress it and it'll open up that port. So a wastegate is used to control boost. And if you wanted to run more boost, there's two different things that you could really do. One, you could change the spring in the wastegate, or two, you could run some kind of boost controller. So that wastegate I just showed you, it's a sealed unit. It'd be very hard, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it'd be very hard to change the spring in that wastegate. They do make adjustable wastegates, and that's what I have in my 3000 GT. It's a forged wastegate, and you can see it's got some Allen head screws there. You can actually take those out, and that wastegate will open up, and there's a spring in there, and you can swap it out for a stiffer spring. So if it's got a 12-pound spring, you could put a 15-pound spring in, and then your motor could technically build 15 pounds of boost. Or you could put a 20-pound spring in, and your motor could build up to 20 pounds of boost. So that's one way to do it. And I said the others with a boost controller. And there are different types of boost controllers. And I'm going to be going over those when I show you the Microsoft Paint thing. But what I want to emphasize is just what a boost controller is really doing. So pretend this is the wastegate that's attached to my turbo, and it's got a boost line that runs over to the engine. When the engine makes 20 PSI, this is seeing 20 PSI. A boost controller, you could cut that hose, put in a boost controller in between it, and all it's got to do is fool the wastegate into not seeing all the boost the motor is making. So if the motor is making 30 pounds of boost, you could trick the wastegate into thinking that it's only making 20 pounds of boost. So it's not going to open up, and by not opening up and allowing that exhaust to exit like it normally would, that extra exhaust gas is going to go through the turbo, it's going to spin faster, and you're going to be able to make more boost. So what I want to emphasize is that a boost controller, if you have a wastegate, you can't just run any spring. The spring is important. You have to choose the right size spring. You can't compensate for whatever boost level you want to run based off any old spring in a boost controller. They do go hand in hand. So typically, a boost controller will allow you to run about double the spring rate. So if this is a 15-pound spring in here, and you put a boost controller in line with this, you could probably run about 28 to 30 pounds of boost max. So they do go hand in hand, so you want to choose your wastegate spring wisely based on the amount of boost you want to make. So if you want to run 28 PSI, you probably want at least a 15-pound spring, maybe even a 17-pound spring. So that's the first thing. And the second thing, you'll hear people say, you've heard me say it, that I'm running wastegate pressure. And all that basically means is that I'm not using a boost controller, I'm relying just on just on the spring in my wastegate. And that's really how you should start any tune to get the fuel and stuff dialed in before you turn up the boost, and that's exactly what we've done in this video series. If you didn't have a vacuum line connected to this wastegate, this wastegate would stay closed forever, and you'd run all kinds of boost. So it's very important, if you have a wastegate and you want to run wastegate pressure, you still need to have a vacuum line to it. You can't just not run anything to it and think that, oh, I'm going to run wastegate pressure because I don't have any line going to my wastegate. That's not how it works. So if you're going to run wastegate pressure, at least have it plumbed up so that the wastegate will see the boost that the motor is making. So I'm on my laptop now, and I promised the Microsoft Paint diagram, so here we go. Over here on the left, we've got our representation of a turbo. And I know I covered this in the engine bay, but I'm going to quickly go through it again here just to give a different perspective. The exhaust comes into the turbo through the exhaust housing, and it spins this exhaust wheel, and it exits out the back of the car. And this exhaust wheel spins. It's connected to a shaft that's tied to this compressor wheel. That's going to take the air coming in through your intake, compress it, and send it off into the motor. The more compressed air you have going in, the more power you'll make. This turbo is regulated with a wastegate, and what I have shown here is an internal wastegate. So we've got our boost source coming into the wastegate, and once it starts to reach whatever the spring is rated for, this green thing is the spring, it's going to start to compress this spring. When that happens, it's going to push down on this arm, it's going to pivot this linkage on this pivot point, and it's going to open this wastegate flap. When that happens, the exhaust that was coming in is going to take the path of least resistance, and it's going to flow through here and out the exhaust. It's going to bypass this exhaust wheel, and that's how a turbo is regulated. And I mentioned that if you have this boost line connected to like the intake manifold and you didn't have any kind of controller, you'd be reliant on whatever the spring is rated for controlling boost. If you didn't connect this line or forgot to connect it, or it broke in half on you, this spring would never compress, this flap would never open, and this turbo would make as much boost as it possibly can until you run into problems. I don't know if you've seen any of the more recent Fast and the Furious movies. I know they're all pretty unrealistic, but there's one where Dom races his cousin's car in the beginning. I think he crosses the finish line, the car's on fire, he's in reverse, and it barrel rolls into the ocean. But before that race, he tied a piece of string to a tab of a soda can and connected it to a line under the hood. That's basically the line he was connecting it to, so he could disconnect this and make the turbo make as much boost as it possibly can. So we're not going to be doing that, but we're going to be going over AEM shortly. And AEM is going to use an electronic boost controller, which is basically going to intercept this line, and it's got an electronic valve that can open and close to regulate the air that's going to this wastegate. But before we get into that, I just want to quickly cover the two types of manual boost controllers that we typically have, just so you have a better understanding of how they work. So the first type is a bleed type, and basically your boost line would run through here, it would connect here, and then the other end would go to the wastegate. And we've got a set screw here, which you can thread in to close this gap or open it up to expand this gap, and that's going to take the boost coming through and it basically bleeds it off. So it's almost as if you punctured a hole in this line, but it's more of a controlled hole because you can control it via this set screw. And typically there'll be some kind of restrictor on this boost controller, just so that you have more finite control up here. And then the other type is a ball and spring manual boost controller, and this is kind of drawn out like the cheaper ones you'll see on eBay or the homemade ones, but there are other styles. This is just one flavor of them. So the boost comes in, it's got to push on this red ball, it's got to compress this spring. Once it compresses enough, this boost is going to be allowed to travel up here and go to the wastegate. So if you were to thread this bolt in, you'd make this spring harder to compress. If you were to thread it out, you'd make it easier to compress, and that's what you do to regulate the boost going to this wastegate. But no matter the controller, whether it's a manual one or an electronic one, you're all more or less doing the same thing, which is fooling this wastegate from seeing the true amount of boost that the motor is actually making. That way you can get more out of your turbo without having to constantly swap out and change the spring. So now let's hop over and get into AEM. And I'll open my Supra calibration. And before we start going into things, I just wanted to point out that over here in the instructions folder of the AEM install directory, they actually have this advanced boost document, and it's from 2013, and it's a while ago, but it does overall a fairly decent job of explaining what we're going to be covering. Not as in-depth as I'm going to go, but it's a real good starting point. And AEM actually changed up some stuff, the way that they control boost. They expanded some tables and made a bunch of changes. So if you've ever tried to look on YouTube for boost videos for AEM, a lot of them that are out there are kind of pre these changes. So following along is best, but this is definitely worth the read in my opinion. So the main two tabs we're going to be covering is this boost tab and this advanced boost tab. And I probably already had you over here earlier when we're doing fuel because I wanted to make sure everything was zeroed out. I wanted this entire wastegate duty map set to 0, this target comp is 0, the error is 0, the pro and int gain is 0, the feedback upper limit and lower limit is 0, and then over here on the advanced boost, I wanted all of these targets set to 0 as well. And the reason that we did that was so that we could keep it at wastegate pressure, and we'd be able to focus on fuel. We wouldn't have to be juggling two different things at the same time. So now we're going to start changing this stuff, but before I go into each table definition and what they are, let's open up the documentation for the MAC valve or AEM boost solenoid that's under the hood. And it's right here. So these are the instructions, and this is what the MAC valve looks like. And I keep calling it a MAC valve even though it says AEM boost solenoid. It really is a MAC valve. If you search for it, you can find this. You can buy it without the AEM sticker on it. It's the exact same thing, just a little bit cheaper. And this is, I think, the third iteration. You can see that it's got a connector on it that plugs into the side. Some of the first earlier ones would have two brown wires that come out of it. There's no connector. And then I think later they switched to two black wires that are a little thicker. And then this is the latest. And it comes with these little barbs for the boost line, and it comes with this breather. And if we scroll down here, they have two different ways that you can hook it up. We've got over here on the right if you have an internal wastegate, and then over here on the left if you have an external wastegate. And just because you have an external wastegate doesn't mean you have to plumb it up like it is on the left. You are also able to plumb it so it would look like it does on the right. And let me just show you kind of what that would look like quickly. So this is our diagram. So if we were to completely eliminate this entirely, and we're to take this and move it over here, it's acceptable to do this as well. So inside this external wastegate is a spring. This is the line that would fight against that spring, so the boost coming in would start to compress that spring up. When it does so, it would start to open this valve. So you can plumb it like this if you don't have a nipple on the top, or even if you do, and you don't want to plumb it like that for simplicity, or maybe it was like this when you had a manual boost controller and you don't want to change it yet. It's perfectly acceptable to do this. For me, I ended up plumbing it like over here on the left. Initially I had it like this, but I did go ahead and change it. And let me kind of show you why. So this is our turbo pressure that comes up. So it comes here where it would work fighting that spring kind of like I just demoed, but it also goes over here through the MAC valve, and this MAC valve can send the boost over here to the top of the wastegate. And what this does is it's got the same boost on each side. It's using this extra boost on the top to force or to work with that spring pressure to keep this wastegate closed until you hit the desired boost. And then once you get up to your boost level, it's got to cut this feed right here. It's not going to send the boost signal out this port on the MAC valve, and then this is going to shoot open. So it allows your wastegate to kind of stay shut until you get to that boost level, where if you have it plumbed like it is over here, or how I just showed you in Microsoft Paint, you're just using that spring. And there's kind of a little gray area as you start to reach that level and the spring starts to compress, it's partially open. Having it plumbed like this on the left gives you a nice crisper transition. People will say it's more responsive, it spools better if it's plumbed like this. But either works, either is acceptable. And then scrolling back at the top, I just want to cover this little section right here. It talks about some of the limits of the solenoid. It just says 12 volts DC, it operates at 31 hertz. There's a spot for that in AEM. Duty cycle is 10% to 90%, and you can think square wave here. It's constantly open, close, open, close, open, close. The amount of time it's open versus closed is the duty cycle. So if it's open for half a millisecond, closed for half a millisecond, you've got a 50% duty cycle. And what this means is that if you try to send a duty cycle to this MAC valve that's less than 10% or greater than 90%, it could run into issues. It could want to stick open or stick close. So we're going to make sure that we're sending it values within this range. And then a max pressure of 120 psi, which is probably 4 times more than we'll ever need. So let's go back to AEM. So like I said earlier, the two tabs we're primarily got to be working on is this boost tab and advanced boost tab. And before I start going over everything in detail, I want to give you a 1,000-foot picture of what I'm trying to get to. When all is said and done and my car is properly configured for boost, I'm going to have a target level of boost that I want my car to make. That's going to be controlled over here. I'm going to be using vehicle speed. Probably 99.9% of the people using AEM are going to either use vehicle speed or target via gear. To get to that boost level, I'm going to have to use the MAC valve that's under my hood. I'm going to have to send it a duty cycle. And I'm going to use this boost target comp table to control the duty cycle that I'm sending that MAC valve, that boost solenoid that's under the hood. And if I'm over boosting, and technically it works the other way as well, if you're not hitting the boost that you want to make, I can use this error duty table to either add some duty cycle or take away some duty cycle. And then finally, the last thing I'd like to point out is this giant graph up here, this big table that takes up half the page. It looks super important, but when all is said and done, this is going to be zeroed out everywhere. I am going to use it to help build this table, but it starts at 0 and it's got to remain 0 when everything is finished. So let's start with options. The first two, boost feedback int gain and pro gain, leave those as 0. Those are something I'll circle back and explain a little better after we've got stuff set up. Just leave them as 0 for now. Fuel cut load, this is at what boost level is it going to kill fuel to your engine. This is kind of a safety feature. Just set this, I'm going to set it out of the way right now. 35.2 is fine. I'm going to be targeting 20 to 25 psi. This would be something once all is said and done, I could come back and I could set it at like 28 psi just just to have some protection if I overboost, but 35 is fine for now. This is the wastegate duty min and the duty max. So it's set to 10 to 90%. And if you recall back here on the solenoid thing, that shows the range right there. So if I tried to send a duty cycle to that solenoid from AEM of say 5%, it wouldn't see 5%, it would see 10%. It wouldn't see anything lower than this. This is what our output is set to, so it's set to PW2. And I covered this during, I think, maybe the wiring diagram or one of the earlier videos. But if we go back and we look at the manual for this, should be towards the top here. Yeah, right here, the boost solenoid, PW2 pin 60B. So on other cars, it may use PW1, but the Supra uses PW2. And we'll go back here. This is the wastegate frequency, and it tells us to set it to 33,333 if we're using the AEM boost control solenoid, which we are. So that's fine. This is boost switch input. So AEM has the ability to wire up like a toggle switch, where if you flip it on, the ECU is going to target whatever is set to this boost switch target. I'm not going to be using this. It's set to always off, which is fine. I'm going to leave it for now, but what I'll probably do after the video is I'm going to go back and just remove stuff that I'm not going to use. Just get it out of the way. There's no point looking at it. Same with this, I could remove it because it has to do with PW1 and the Supra uses PW2. So here we have PW2, and it can change the frequency of the output. So one off frequency range is 10 Hertz to 1 kilohertz. And if we went back here, you can see that this operates at 31 Hertz. So it's within that range. So it should be off. It comes as off. So I'll probably hide this as well. And then boost feedback positive limit and minus limit. This has to do with the error correction. So you can set how much correction do we allow, and that kind of relates to this stuff, which I'm going to explain later. So just leave this as 0. And there's one more thing that I want to show, and I'm going to insert it as boost. Oops. Boost wastegate 2 invert, and there's a 1 invert. So I've got this selected and typically set to off for the AEM solenoid. And if we peek back at these instructions and we go down to the picture, it tells you right here, we'll give you the highest boost when the solenoid is fully energized, meaning 90% duty cycle. And that's what this controls. So when it's set to off, you get the highest boost when you get the highest duty cycle. And that's true of the AEM solenoid, the MAC valve. But apparently there's other boost solenoids out there where it works in reverse. And if you had to invert the signal, you'd have to set this to on. So it's something that's worth checking, even if you have the AEM solenoid, just to make sure that that's set to off. Now that I confirmed it was, I'm going to remove it. Next, let's talk about this boost wastegate base duty map table and this boost target comp. They kind of work hand in hand, and if there's anything to fully grasp for dialing in boost, it's these two panes. So AEM works by sending the duty cycle to that solenoid, the wastegate solenoid that's under the hood, and it has no way of knowing that to make 30 pounds of boost, we need to send it, let's say, a 60% duty cycle. It's got to vary by car, by engine, by turbo, by wastegate, probably even vacuum line size. It has no way of knowing. We need to help build that mapper table for AEM. And that's what these two tables are going to allow us to do. This is the mapper table, and this is what we're going to use to help build that mapper table. So I'm going to start, and I'm going to set this to 10 for everything, and 10 is my minimum wastegate duty max. That's why I'm starting it at 10. You could start it at 5, but it wouldn't really get you anywhere. It would still be sending 10 to the solenoid. So I'm going to set this at 10, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to do a pull, maybe in third gear from 3000 to 5000 RPM, and I'm going to log boost. And I'm going to record what boost level I get, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set all of these to 15. And I'm going to repeat, and then I'm going to set everything to 20. And as I'm doing this, I'm going to be looking at how much boost I make, and eventually I'm going to start making a little more boost than my wastegate. And it's at that point in time you have to be a little cautious. You can still make the 5 psi increments, but you gotta pay attention to your wideband to knock, because you're actually gonna start getting into cells for your fuel table and ignition that you haven't been in before, because before, when you're on wastegate duty cycle, you may have been down here, but you're going to be getting into this upper area, so you need to keep an eye on your fuel and your timing. If you knock, you can pull a little bit of timing. If your air fuel is off, you can adjust that. So you gotta pay attention there. And then one thing that helps is if you add these two values to your tuning tab. So this first one just shows the duty cycle that's set to the solenoid. This one shows what the duty cycle is in the map. They're both going to give you the same value, so I guess technically you can add one or the other. But you wanna do this, because then you can come back and you can kind of look through your logs. And if you're looking through a log and you see, oh, I hit 15 psi in this log, you won't be questioning to yourself, well, what did I have the wastegate map to? What was my table set to when I hit 15 psi? Was this the third pull or the fourth pull or the fifth pull? I can't quite remember. You'll have in that log that you had it set to 19.9, and you'll be like, oh yeah, that was 19.9. So we're gonna keep incrementing this by 5. No, not one value, the whole table, and we're gonna end up building this little trend line. And these numbers down here aren't the greatest. Maybe they make more sense in a different unit than PSI, but we'll be able to come in and build this trend line. So maybe your wastegate spring is 10, so you're not really going to see an increase of boost until around here. So this is 13.3, and maybe you didn't get to 13.3 until your duty cycle was 30. And then this is 16, maybe you didn't get there till your duty cycle was 35. And then this is 20, maybe you didn't get there until your duty cycle was 43. Oops. And you're going to build this trend line, and then after everything is said and done, once you build it up to the boost level that you plan on running, you can just kind of level it off over to the side. So you could select all these, and we could do, I think it was 42, something like that. And then AEM is got a reference list. So when you say, I want to target 20 PSI, AEM is got to know, well, I need to send that duty cycle to the wastegate. I'm going to send 43%, because that's the mapper table that we help build. And you may not get it perfect the first time. Like you may get it close, and you may find that you overboost or you undershoot it. But you can gradually come back and adjust this. It's a lot easier for us to think in terms of boosts than duty cycle, and this helps make that translation. So before we talk about the error, let's assume that we've got this table set up. And one thing that some people do, this is all the lower end. This graph looks like it shoots up kind of high. is we can set this to 10 because that's the minimum wastegate duty cycle. Even though we'd be requesting 0, it would still be getting 10, and that makes this transition look a little better. You can do it one way or another. You can smooth out the line. And I don't know if this is what my trend line is going to look like. I'm going to end up doing it. And once I'm done with this, I'm going to want to target some kind of boost level. And that can be done by going to the Advanced Boost tab. Before we hop over there, I'm just going to zero out this table again. And on this tab, we have 5 different ways to target boost via RPM, throttle position sensor, trim, gear, or vehicle speed. And no one really uses RPM or TPS, so we'll leave those zeroed out. I'll probably hide these graphs later on just so I don't have to look at them. There's boost target trim. This uses a AEM 12 position potentiometer, and a potentiometer is just a variable resistor, so it can output 12 different voltages, and then in AEM you can configure a boost level for each voltage. It's kind of a more advanced form than this boost switch input that we went over earlier, but instead of having one target, you've got 12 of them. Then we've got boost by gear and boost by vehicle speed. So why would you want to target boost by gear? Maybe you're at the track and you spin a lot taking off the line. You could target a lower boost level in first gear and a higher boost level in second, third, fourth, etc. You can kind of get that same style of traction control by targeting with vehicle speed as well. Maybe above 30 miles an hour, we want to target 25 psi, but below that, we want to target 15 psi. And the ECU is going to look at your target table. It's going to see what boost level you're targeting, and then it's going to go to this boost target comp table that hopefully you did a good job building and setting up, and it's going to say, oh, he wants 20 psi. I know at 20 psi I need to send 30% duty cycle or whatever it is to the wastegate duty solenoid that's under the hood. So these 5 targets do build on top of each other. I wouldn't recommend it. So if you had 25 psi here, and for some reason you had 10 psi across the board here, your boost target level would be 35 psi. I'd recommend just picking one and sticking to it. I'm going to be using vehicle speed in my Supra. That being said, you should make sure that the speed signal can be seen by the ECU. Boost target by gear, that's also going to use a combination of vehicle speed and engine RPM to figure out what gear you're in. There's actually a wizard up here for a configure gear ratio wizard to set that. Initially, I wouldn't worry about boost target by gear. Make sure everything works. Do it by vehicle speed before messing with this. But when you start, you're going to want all of these targets zeroed out anyways. So get everything zeroed, and we'll go back to the boost tab. And then here we're going to want to zero out this target comp, and then we're going to set this back to 10 where we started. And I'd like to point out, I mentioned earlier that previous AEM versions, the boost was a little different. Some of the past videos that you'll see online cover the old way. You can see here that this target comp goes from 0 all the way up to 100 and 0 to negative 100. In the past, this went from 0 to 50, so you didn't get this big range. You got 0 to 50, 0 to negative 50. So what people would do is up here, they'd set this to negative 50, which it doesn't even let me do now. And then down here, you'd basically work from negative 50 to 50 for your 100 point. But we don't have to do that anymore. AEM made it a lot nicer. So if you're looking at an old map and you see some weird stuff happening with negative numbers, that's why. Update your firmware and you won't have to worry about it. You'll get the 0 to 100. And then make sure your int and pro gain is still 0. This feedback stuff is 0. And your boost error, leave that as 0. And we're ready to start doing what I described, where we start incrementing by 5. Just to reiterate, keep an eye on your fuel. We've got this trim table that we set up earlier, where we've got this nice linear line. When we're doubling the boost, we're doubling the fuel trim, which makes sense. Twice the air, twice the fuel. So this should help keep the fuel in the ballpark. But monitor your air fuel, because once you start climbing on boost above what wastegate is, you're getting into areas of the map that you haven't touched. So you may need to increase it by 5 psi, do a pull, check your boost, check your air fuel ratio, make an adjustment to your fuel map, maybe pull some timing if you see signs of knock, and then repeat. So I finished doing all of my pulls. It didn't take me very long to do. And you can see I've got a chain of files right here on my desktop. And I'm just gonna open a few of them to kind of go over what I described earlier, just to really drive home the process. So this very first one isn't actually a pull, it's just me idling in the driveway. And what I wanted to point out here are these two values. So this boost wastegate map that we added, this is what the map was calling, and I had it set to 10 earlier, but I set it here to 5 just to show you that the wastegate output was actually 10. So even if you request at any time a lower map value than the lower limit, it's still going to default to the lower limit. So this was just to prove that. Now if we open up this next one and I find my pull, which is over here, zoom to selection, and you can see here this blue line is my boost, and where it kind of levels out, it's around 15, 15.2, 14.8. This is the minimum wastegate that's going out, which is 10%. So this must be what my spring is. My spring in my external wastegate is a 15-pound spring. So what I would do is I'd started a file and I said 10% duty cycle. That gave me 15 psi. And then I would repeat for 15, for 20, for 25, 30, all the way up until where I hit a boost level that I felt comfortable with. I'm just on 93 pump gas. I'm not running meth or anything. So if someone told you that they're running 28 psi on pump gas on a Supra, they'd probably say you're crazy. But my timing is really low up there. It's only at like 9 degrees, so it was fine to go up this high. So I did all my polls. I analyzed the data. I looked at it for each one, and then I repeated. My air fuel was really good. So here's my second to last. So you can see 27. I think it even spiked a little bit higher here. 28 psi right here. And the nice thing about adding those values is we can see what my wastegate map was. So it was set to 50 here, and I hit around 28 psi. So by adding those values as channels to monitor, I'm able to see what we're asking for and see the corresponding boost. If I didn't do that and I was looking at these files, I'd have to know that this is 10, 15, 20, 25, etc. But by adding them, it makes it a little easier. So now that I have these values right here, all I need to do is enter them into AEM. So let's hop over to AEM Tuner, and we're going to focus on this boost target comp table. And I had this zeroed out while I was doing the pulls, but I've already gone ahead and pre-filled it based on what I put together via looking at all of those logs. And I did that just so you wouldn't have to watch me struggle through it. But basically all I do is I pick one of these columns. Remember, they're predefined. We can't change the values on this x-axis. So I'd pick one of these columns. So let's say I pick this one, and this is 19.3 psi. Let's call it 20. And I'd look over at what I pulled, and I'd say, okay, 20 psi, that was 30% duty cycle. So I'd come back here, and I'd put it at 30% duty cycle, or in my case, a little bit less because it's not 20 psi, it's 19.3. And I would do that for each column on here, and I only went up to probably 28, 29 psi. If I had kept going, I'm sure I'd have this line continue on upwards like this, but I'm on stock head stud, so I didn't want to push my limit. So what I did is after 29 psi, I just kind of leveled it off. That way, if for some reason AEM is ever asking to run more boost than 28 psi, it's got to reference this table, and we're just got to report back the duty cycle as if it was 28 psi. So this is kind of a little bit of a safety factor. And then before the boost started going up, when it was wastegate pressure, I kind of transition into it. And then right here, this flat spot, this could be set to 0, but I set it to 10.2% duty cycle. And I did that just because it's the minimum wastegate duty cycle. I know AEM, even if I ask for less, I proved it by showing you that first log, is going to do 10.2% duty cycle. But I like to put it right here in the graph just so I can remind myself that that's what it's doing. And it just makes this kind of transition look a little better. It doesn't really matter, honestly, if you leave this at 0 and then transition up. This is just how I do it. There's no right or wrong way here. Now, if I jump over to the Advanced Boost tab, you can see that I've got this boost target by vehicle speed set up, and I'm going to target 24 psi. No matter how fast I'm going, that's what I'm going to stick with for now. I did go higher than that while I was building that comp table, but I backed it up 4 or 5 psi just because this isn't right on the edge. I was realistically only able to get away with those higher spikes just because I had low timing up in that area. So 24 psi is more realistic for me. So I'm going to stick here for the next chapter when I get into ignition timing. But I still do have a few things that I want to go over for boost. So I'm going to go back to this boost tab, and let's talk about the boost error duty table a little more. In this left area of the map is where you can add extra duty cycle if you're not hitting your target boost level, and I like to keep this zeroed out. If I'm not hitting my target boost level, instead of having this error table kind of add extra duty cycle, I'd rather come over here and adjust my comp table and kind of bump up this trend line here. But over on the right, this is where it can take away duty cycle if I'm over boosting. So this is more important to me as kind of a little safety measure. You could come back to this comp table and just kind of lower it some. You can think of adjusting this comp table and leaving this boost error duty cycle table zeroed out, kind of like a manual boost controller, where if it's too low, you can crank it up a little more. If it's too high, you can crank it down a little. But I'm going to use this right side of the map just as a little safety feature. So it's a little more advanced than a manual boost controller. So right here, if I am 2.5 psi above the target boost that I'm looking for, it's got to be allowed to subtract 5.1% duty cycle. And if I'm over 5 psi off target, it's going to be allowed to subtract 10% duty cycle. And if I go back to this chart that I put together, you can see that I was incrementing by 5% duty cycle each time. So what's 10% of 40? It's 4. So it's going to be allowed basically to subtract around 4% duty cycle, which is, here it goes from 23 to 21, which is like 1.5 to 2 psi difference. So if I'm a little bit off target, it can subtract more. And you can vary this, you can be more aggressive, but I like to just keep it kind of minimal. And if I'm way off, you're better off going back and adjusting this. This is just for kind of small corrections. It shouldn't be, you shouldn't have this map awful and so far off that you have to rely on a lot of corrections here. This is just for small stuff. So what a lot of people do is they'll build a line like here. They won't really go above 10%. So next I want to cover boost by gear, but before I can get into that, we need to take a little tangent to deal with my vehicle speed. signal. And I'd mentioned that it looked like it was working, but I don't know if anyone caught it while I was showing one of my log files for gathering boost. You can see this green line here keeps spiking up and down, and that's actually my vehicle speed signal. And you can see I'm doing 67, 68 miles an hour, and then out of nowhere it's jumping up to 163 miles an hour, and then back down to 72 miles an hour. I think right here it even jumped uh, higher. So it says I'm going 255 miles an hour instantaneous. I can assure everyone watching this that my vehicle cannot jump from 72 miles an hour to 255 miles an hour in a split second like this. So clearly something was wrong with my vehicle speed. So I want to cover what I did to resolve that. So if I look at the OEM wiring diagram for a Supra, there's two speed sensors. Every automatic and manual turbo Supra is going to have the speed sensor number 1, and the automatic Supras are going to have a secondary speed sensor that feeds to the ECU. So this first one is the primary one that AEM uses. It's called, at least for the Supra calibration file, the T3 sensor. And the signal goes up this blue wire with a red stripe to this little junction, and it will split, and it will go to the combination meter. So this is my speedometer gauge on my gauge cluster, and it'll also feed over to the odometer. And on the Supra, the odometer is not part of the cluster. It's part of the trim bezel on it. It's a little digital display. And that signal at the odometer will output through this pink wire, and it'll travel to the ECU. It comes up here and it goes into pin A2. This is the T3 connector on the Supra AEM ECU. What they don't really tell you here is that this signal is like a sine wave. It's just like from calculus. The signal will go up to 10 volts. It'll go through the 0 volt x-axis. It'll drop down to negative 10 volts, and it'll repeat. It's not a square wave that leaves the speed sensor. And the cluster is able to convert that and use it. And this odometer is able to take that in, and it actually will convert it to a square wave signal, so something that goes from like 0 to 5 volts and repeats, and it'll output on this pink wire. So the ECU needs to see a square wave, but the vehicle speed sensor is outputting the sine wave, and the odometer is what goes ahead and converts that. And if we were to actually look at the speed sensor one notes in the service manual, it tells us that, or at least hints at it. After this, the signal is converted into a more precise rectangular waveform by the waveform shaping circuit inside the combination meter. It is then transmitted to the engine control module. So that's exactly what happens. And it's not uncommon for the odometer on a Supra to stop working. It'll continue maybe incrementing the miles like mine, but the signal that it outputs, the square wave, doesn't happen. It's not outputting anything. And some people can take them apart and they can resolder the back of the board. They call them cold solder joints, and sometimes that fixes it, sometimes it doesn't. It didn't help in my case. So without really knowing any better, I read online, and a lot of people suggest it on the Supra forums. They say, hey, just cut this pink wire and then take that pink wire that feeds to the ECU and tie into this blue wire with a red stripe that feeds the odometer. That way we send the signal bypassing the odometer right to the ECU. And that's what was causing all of my problems, because this is what's supposed to convert that sine wave to a square wave, and we're basically sending that sine wave right to the ECU. And AEM doesn't know how to deal with that sine wave. And if we look right here, this is actually a picture of an oscilloscope in my car trying to diagnose this problem. And this is the sine wave that I'm seeing. So it's going up to 10, 11 volts, and it was dropping down through the x-axis, and it was going to negative 10 volts. So this is what I was sending to the ECU. And there's still a frequency to this wave, and I think what was happening is AEM's looking for that square wave, and it would see kind of these jumps and dips as a rising or falling edge, and it was trying its best to read this waveform. And a majority of the time it was actually reading correctly, but it would get into these circumstances, maybe partial acceleration, deceleration, where it couldn't handle that signal and I'd get these blips. And I need to have this fixed before I can do boost by gear. So to get around this, and what other people have done, is they can get the signal from an ABS sensor. And if I take a look at the service manual, and I think it's around 166, see if I need to go up or down here. ABS, traction ECU, I think I need to go up. If we look at the ABS wiring diagram, there's 4 speed sensors on a Supra, 1 for each wheel, and the ABS module, at least for the twin turbo Supra, is underneath the radio. So if you remove your radio, bolted to the floor is the ABS ECU, and it's got 3 different connectors on it, and this connector right here, A121, which they call the B connector, is where the right rear input feeds in. So what I did is I tapped into this line because the ABS sensors are sending a square wave. I tapped into this blue wire that feeds into this B2 pin of the A21 connector, and I ran a temp wire down to my ECU and I fed it into B28. And B28 is the optional secondary input speed sensor on the AEM ECU. So if you had an automatic Supra, I said there's 2 speed sensors. AEM has the primary one, which is pin A2. They call it the T3 input, but there's also a secondary input for a secondary speed sensor, and that's what I'm running this ABS signal into. And if I go over to AEM Tuner, and there's this taco speed page that you can get to. It's under the tabs. It may even be a hidden tab that you can add. Nope, I guess it's not. It's right here. Down on the bottom left is where they have the speedo options. So right here, I said for my input, I don't want to use pin A2, which is the T3 input. I want to use pin B28, which they refer to as T4. So I had to set this to T4, and I had to mess with this value until my miles per hour started showing correctly. So I found that 22 was a good value, and I did a little bit of driving around to figure that out, and my signal is perfect. There's no more spikes or anything like that. So that's what I would recommend if your odometer is not working correctly. If your odometer is working correctly, you can leave this on T3, and everything will function like normal. And I think you can even use the delivered value here, which I think is actually 220 for the Supra. But if you do tie into an ABS sensor, it's going to be a value of 22. So now that my speed problems are all remedied, the next thing that I set up was boost by gear. And boost by gear is exactly what it sounds. AEM is able to calculate what gear you're in, even with a manual transmission car. And then based on that gear, you can target different boost levels. So how does AEM know what gear you're in? It can calculate that based on the speed of the engine, so RPM, and vehicle speed, so miles per hour. So this is why it was very important for me to get my speed working. And it'll take those values and it's going to pass them through this, I call it a hidden formula, because I really can't figure out what the formula is for version 2, and we'll touch on that shortly. And it's going to come up with a gear ratio. And then based on that gear ratio, AEM is going to have a graph that you're going to set up using a wizard. It's going to check that graph for the current gear ratio, and it's going to be able to determine, okay, you're at this gear ratio, it falls in line here, you must be in gear 3. So let's take a look at that graph before we even get into the wizard. And this is what it looks like. And it goes from 0 all the way up to 255 for a gear ratio. and along the bottom we have gears 1 through 7. And it's a little confusing because they have a gear 1.5 and a gear 2.5 and a gear 3.5. They cleared that up in AEM Infinity. They actually call it 112233. But all this is a range. So if I look at this dot and this dot, which is for 2 and 2.5, if your gear ratio is between these two dots, then you must be in gear 2. If your gear ratio is between these two dots, then you must be in gear 3. If you're between these two dots, then you must be in gear 4. So that's all it means, and we're going to set this up using the wizard, but before we get to the wizard, I just want you to keep in the back of your mind that this is a graph that goes from 0 to 255. So let's go over to wizards and configure gear ratio wizard. So the very first two drop downs should be engine speed for the top one and vehicle speed for that. How do I know that? They actually tell us. It can also be set to engine speed. It can also be set to vehicle speed. So set those. This third one, gear cal M, is a multiplier value. And AEM literally does not do a very good job describing what this is or how to use it. And you also can't find a lot of information online about it. And if you don't have this set right, you can actually run into two separate problems trying to do this. And I'll go over both of those shortly. But before we continue on with that, let's talk about the gear ratio. And I said it's a mystery, it's a hidden formula, at least in AEM version 2. If you looked at the AEM Infinity documentation, they describe gear ratio as engine speed divided by vehicle speed. And they make no reference to that multiplier. So you could assume that in AEM version 2, that this would be the formula. And you could go out and you could log shifting through every gear, and you could look at RPM, and you can look at speed, and you could say, well, I'm going to use a multiplier of 1, and you could calculate that gear ratio, and you could try to use that, and you'd be 100% wrong. Because we don't know what that formula is, and I can tell you it is definitely not what I have here. It's some other formula that I can't seem to come up with math that works with the way that they calculate gear ratio. So I don't know what the formula is. But what I can tell you is the best way to go about using this multiplier value. And the first roadblock that you can run into is that it can be so small that it's going to end up zeroing out your entire gear ratio calculation table. And the purpose of this wizard, or the goal, is that you'll drive the car in each of these gears, and while you're in that gear, you'll just click the button. So if I'm in first gear and I'm driving at 3,000 RPMs, I'll click gear 1. And AEM is going to think for 2 or 3 seconds, it's going to sample the data, and then right below gear 1, it's going to show you the ratio that it calculated. And then you'll do the same for 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, then 6, and then you'll skip 7, and you'll click the set to gear ratio table, and it's going to build this table in the background that I showed you earlier. So by default, for the Supra map, this came at 0.0002, and if you went through the process, all of these would calculate as 0. So you'd have a map that's zeroed out, and that's no good. If you tried to do the 1.0 approach and you put a 1 in here, and you went through the polls, you'd end up with a map that looks like this. Let me close it. It looks like this. And this is also problematic. Remember I said to keep in the back of your mind that this went from 0 to 255? Look at these gear ratios. They're all below 40. So in first gear, I'm dealing with around 37. In sixth gear, I'm dealing with around 9. There's not a giant enough room in here for this to work accurately. And if you try to do this and use this graph, AEM is gonna be confused. It's gonna either say you're in gear 0 or you're in gear 7. It's not gonna work correctly. So what you want to do is, back in the wizard, let me open it back up, is you want to set this modifier value so that you take advantage of that entire chart. So you can start at 1, you can start at 1.5, 2. You basically want to drive around in first gear and find a modifier value where you sample gear 1 and it gets you around like 200 to 220 to 240, somewhere above 200. Because remember when I went over these boost notes, gear 1 is going to be your highest gear ratio. So you're just trying to find something in gear 1 that's in the upper 200. And then when you find that, for me it was 5.5, go on to gear 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and then click Set to Gear Ratio table. And you'll end up with something kind of like this. For this 0, 1, it's actually, for 1.0, it's going to look just like this. It's going to be all the way down at 0. And I think that's a bug or a mistake, and that's going to be problematic for you. So let's set that back. Or rather than doing 250 here, let's do 200. So if we're between 200 and 250, we're going to be in first gear. I think I had that set to 250 before, which is not right. It should give you a range here. When I was doing my calibration using the wizard, I think when I had it set to 5.5, first gear was around 220, if I recall. So this will give me that range. And there are some gray areas in here that kind of fall in between the peaks. They're not directly between two dots. AEM still does a good job of figuring out which one to go to. But if you do log and you see some stuff that is slightly out of range, you can come back in here and manually adjust these dots to be a little lower or a little higher as needed. And then to take advantage of this table, let's go to Advanced Boost. And we're going to fill in this boost target gear. But before I do that, let's set this to 0 for speed, because if you remember I said they build on top of each other. And then maybe for first gear we want to target 15 psi, maybe second gear is 20, and then the remaining gears, once we have good traction, we'll go 24 psi. So you can build the target like this. AEM will figure out what gear you're in. It knows what gear you're in based on this table that we built. It'll target that boost level, and then it'll use this comp table to set your ratio for your wastegate deduce cycle to hit that boost level. And if you have some error or you're over boosting a little, it can use this error duty cycle. And the last thing that I want to go over is this boost feedback int gain and pro gain. So boost feedback, int gain, and pro gain isn't documented very well, not in AEM, not online, but we can piece together some information about it over in the tuning explanations and in some of the instructions. Not even in the advanced boost notes for EMS version 2. But there are some things with these EMS version 4 notes that touch on it. And I'm going to be honest, I'm not a total expert on this, but I am going to share what I do know about it. Personally, I've never had the need to use this. I normally leave it at 0. But let's get started with what I do know about it, and maybe it'll put you on the right track. So let's jump over to some poorly put together Microsoft Paint drawings and see if I can do a crash course on a PID controller in 2 to 3 minutes. So what we have here is an electric motor, and let's pretend it's either not spinning or spinning at a low RPM, what we see in red, and we want to get it up to this target speed as in green. So in a perfect world, you'd think we'd just ask that motor to run faster, and it would jump right up to our target and start spinning that fast. But more than likely, that motor is going to take a little bit to start turning faster. It's going to build speed. It may go above our target, and then it'll slow down. It'll go under our target, above it, and it may mellow out slightly under our target. So how we get from point A to point B can be controlled with a PID controller. And it's not specific to just electric motors. It can be many different things. It's an industry standard. And there's 3 components of it: proportional, integral, and derivative. That's how they get the acronym PID. And there's a complex math formula that combines all 3 of these to help vary this waveform of going to point A to point B. And this first part is the proportional, this middle part is the integral, and this last part is the derivative. And if you look at this formula, you can see there's a KD, a KI, and a KP. Those are some arbitrary values that you can toss in there. It could be a 0, a 1, a 2, etc. to try to shape this waveform. And it's not important to understand the math behind it. I'm not going to pretend to know everything about this formula, but what is important is to understand these three terms and how they relate to this waveform. So let's start with the proportional. Proportional is how fast does it approach this target. So if that motor is spinning at a low RPM and we crank it right up and we have too high of a proportional value, we're more than likely to overshoot the target, and we could overshoot it by a lot if the proportional is too high. And then when it tries to self-correct itself, it may undershoot it by a lot. So proportional controls how fast you get from the start of this red line to the green line. And you can get there very fast with a high proportional, but you're more than likely to overshoot it. And let's skip over integral for now, and let's just go to derivative next. So derivative can add kind of a braking functionality to this proportional gain. So if you do set the proportional high and you get there fast, you can kind of break it and reduce this overshoot that you see here. And then when it self-corrects, you can reduce the self-correction. So basically this red oscillation here would be a lot closer to the target line. It wouldn't have as high of a caps if you were to increase the derivative value of this formula, the KD. And then the integral is over time. So after you've gone up and you've reached your target and the derivative has been applied and you're close to your target, when it mellows out, it's got to trickle up slowly towards this target after those other corrections. So there's three parts to it, and just because there's three parts to it does not mean that you have to use all three parts of it. It can be expensive if you have a simple application that you don't need the very precise point A to point B. You can get away with just using maybe two of the three or one of the three. Or if you have a very precise thing, maybe something medical related, you need this to go to point A to point B as quickly as possible and to not overshoot it. You can have a complex PID controller that takes into all three of these. But for AEM, they give us a proportional and they give us an integral. They don't give us a derivative. And if we hop back over to tuner, this is our proportional, this pro gain, and this is our integral. And there's no derivative option in here. I don't think AEM has one. I mean, I guess there could be one that's behind the scenes that you're not able to adjust, but I don't think so. I think they just have the int and pro gain. So let's start with my theory on how these two items work. First, let's just highlight them all and see what it says in the explanation. It doesn't really give us a lot. Integral gain for boost and proportional gain for boost. So the description up there doesn't give us a whole lot. If we look in the function explanation and you were to scroll through all of this and read it, there's nothing in here about the proportional gain, but there is something about the integral gain. An integral component, long term, can be added by setting an int gain value of, and then it's just showing 0 because that's what I have set over there. So nothing in this explanation about the proportional gain, but it does reference the int gain. And then if we come down here and we were to select this feedback upper limit and lower limit, it does mention proportional and int up here. It says sets the maximum feedback correction allowed in the positive duty direction for boost, proportional and integral control only. So this to me means that if you were to set these values, they would only apply if you were using this pro and int gain. But what's a little misleading about that is in the same function explanation, it just says the most it can reduce is negative 10.2. And that's reading from this value right here where I have it at negative 10.2. And I did that just to kind of be redundant. That was the most I was going to take away here in this boost error table. So I put it over there as well because I noticed it had it in this function explanation. So I'm sure if you did some tests, you could find out if it uses this or if it uses this limit or if this is just a hard cap on top of what this is. So it's not 100% clear what the pro gain and int gain, how they relate to this table. And my theory, and a few other people online have this theory as well, is that if you have this table not set, we're going to use the pro gain. So if you wanted to use pro gain, you could set this to a value and you could keep this zeroed out. And then int gain works on top of the pro gain, or it can work on top of this table if you were to use this instead of pro gain. And that's why it mentions it in this function explanation. And I think a lot of people came to that conclusion because if you look at the EMS 4 notes, they mention when the boost feedback on error control is off, so that's not an option in AEM version 2, but it must be in version 4, and the boost error duty table is not used, the proportional and integral control is applicable. So there is a boost error duty table in AEM version 2, so this is suggesting if it's not used that both proportional and integral can be used. So if you didn't use this, the version 4 notes is saying both of these will become applicable. But because it mentions integral in this function explanation, people think that it's either one or the other. You either use the pro gain or you use the boost error duty, and then the int gain can work on top of it. And personally, I've never had to set the pro or int gain. I've always just used the error duty table, and I just use it as a safety measure to reduce. I find if you're undershooting or overshooting, you can just adjust this trend line. It doesn't have to be as nitpicky as fuel or timing tables. It's just setting a boost controller, and a lot of people will run manual boost controllers. So that's if they can get away with that, then we can get away with not using every single feature for boost. So I leave that at 0. I leave my upper limit at 0. I set this minus limit to whatever I have in this table. I make sure this is built in and more or less accurate. This remains zeroed out. And then on the advanced boost, I'm going to use boost target by vehicle speed or target by gear. And that's pretty much everything there is for controlling boost. So that's going to end this video, and hopefully the weather will cooperate and I may be able to get the ignition timing one out before winter.